by the Romans was turned into a single chapter of a vast historical epic. It's an epic in which monarchs ride with their cohorts in splendor, and those who are the casualties of history cringe and suffer. Kaulbach's world is one of victims and murderers. The artist's vision of history tends to polarize. On the one hand, cruelty, and on the other, a sugary innocence. Angels bearing the Holy Grail. And below them, a Sunday school group absorbed in their own goodness. It's a goodness personified by the sweet innocence of children, as Kaulbach saw them to be. Kaulbach's effect on popular taste was not perhaps as elevated as he might have wished. Instead of pointing the way to modern art, he gave us modern kitsch. Those little pictures of angels that still hover over children's thoughts owe little to Raphael and a lot to Kaulbach. The artist might have felt that greater glory than kitsch was due to him. Surprisingly, what have endured with undiminished fame are Kaulbach's illustrations to Goethe's poem, Reynard the Fox, which he engraved at the same period as he was painting the destruction of Jerusalem. There's certainly no sweetness here, only a somewhat heavy satire in which the animal kingdom is savagely humanized. And Kaulbach's fondness for violence finds an outlet in sneering references to methods of persuasion once employed by the Roman Catholic Church. But even though this was not at all the course that painting was to follow, all was not entirely lost. The visual arts by no means ignored the operatic example set by Wilhelm von Kaulbach. There was to be a new art form that had reason to be grateful to him. The spirit of Kaulbach was reborn in Hollywood. During the First World War, the American film director David Griffith made the first epic movies, Birth of a Nation, and a year later, that mammoth production called Intolerance. Whether Griffith was aware that Kaulbach had already chronicled such events in pictures is doubtful. What is beyond doubt is that Kaulbach, had he lived 70 years later, would have adored direct scenes like these. Perhaps that is the dream on which his fame may live. An artist paints himself in the act of painting himself. He gazes at the person who interests him most, doing what he enjoys doing most. Nothing in art is more self-obsessed than a self-portrait of an artist at work. This is the German painter Lovis Corinth. He's in his studio in the year 1914. Corinth is 56. As we draw closer to him, it's as though we become the mirror into which he gazes. We become the object of this fierce stare that he awards himself. It's a look such as we've seen in Rembrandt's self-portraits, and more particularly in those of Van Gogh, the artist self-hypnotized. No photograph can capture that intensity of self-regard. Would Rembrandt, one wonders, have looked like this, the eye of a camera, or Van Gogh even? Here then is Lovis Corinth photographed 7 years earlier, in 1907, looking prosperous and respectable, with no apparent fascination for his own physiognomy. There's no self-questioning in those eyes. It's a blank look that invites a curriculum vitae to tell you about the man. That he was born in East Prussia in 1858. That he spent 3 years in Paris in the 1880s, where he began to paint in the Impressionist style. Then he returned to work in Germany. There's nothing impressionist about his earliest self-portrait, painted soon after his return from Paris in 1887. Neither the face nor the manner in which it's painted suggest anything other than the most respectable orthodoxy. The haughty look, dark background, exaggerated lighting. 9 years later, 1896, and a quite different view of himself. He's in his Munich studio. Instead of a claustrophobic blackness around him, Corinth now sets himself in the grey daylight against the bare grid of his studio window. Unexplained, his companion is a skeleton. His face has lost that superior look. Now he seems more like a seasoned prize fighter. The mysterious skeleton belongs to a medical school, a teaching model that's also a memento mori. The artist aware of aging, still only 38, but touched by that turn-of-the-century pessimism as he gazes dispassionately in the mirror. There's no sparkle in the eyes, a certain deadness. And the city of Munich behind him has no sparkle either, just roofs, spires, chimney smoke. Whatever turmoils, passions, fears lie within Corinth, they remain hidden for many years, until in December 1911, a sudden shadow of death passes near. Corinth suffers a stroke at 53, and 3 months later, he paints himself again in the mirror. A totally different visage now, gaunt, ravaged. The right side of his face partly paralyzed, the mouth thin, the eyes turned away. But his whole manner of painting has changed too. Instead of that rather detached realism, now the brush marks are agitated. They seem to carve at his own face, seeking out the lines of tension, the strain around the mouth, the eyes. Suddenly, Corinth has become part of the prevailing art movement in avant-garde Germany, Expressionism. Like Goya's deafness, the stroke Corinth suffered transformed him as a painter almost overnight. Expressionism is about extreme states of emotion. His look is wild. In a pencil sketch of the same year, 1912, again the agitated technique. And a preoccupation now, not simply with his own face, but with recording that face. The process of analysis and of creation. A drama of mirrors. Just 2 years later comes the painting we began with, 1914. His face has that same wild gaze. The stare is unflinching, as if daring the mirror to betray any sign of paralysis. The hand holds the brush firmly, a broad brush for those bold strokes of paint that Corinth now favors. Around him, all the clutter of the studio, easel, frames, stacked paintings face to the wall. In the center of the picture is another drama of mirrors. The artist confronts himself. Here in his workshop, he holds the tools of his trade, palette, colors, and brushes. With these, he is placing on record what he sees as he gazes in the glass. We can't see the result, but of course we don't need to, because the picture he's working on is the very one we're looking at. We are his mirror, and what we see is what he sees in that mirror. And he makes sure, by tilting it, that we see his palette, the ingredients, as well as the result. He gives us the whole working process. This obsession with himself at work is caught in 2 photographs of Lovis Corinth that were taken in his Berlin studio 5 years later, in 1919. The difference is that now he's posing almost impassively. All the tension has gone. fierce, glaring look is still there, though the glance is not directed at himself in the mirror, but at the camera lens. He's dressed up for the photographer, but he holds the paintbrush at exactly the same angle as in the self-portrait. The hand, the brushstroke, where the energy flows between the painter and his canvas. In 1925, the year of his death, Lovis Corinth put his name to a self-portrait for the last time. He's 67. There's no loss of concentration in that stare, those fierce eyes turned on himself in the mirror. Only now he shows us the mirror. So we have the familiar full face, or nearly so. The prominent cheekbones, sharp nose, sharp eyes, heavy eyebrows, and that tense mouth, all shadows and highlights. And the profile as well. The mirror shows us the invisible side, completes the portrait head as if we're moving around it. Corinth conducted a repeated analysis of his own physiognomy over the last 14 years of his life. When he painted himself working at his easel in 1914, he displayed no signs of the stroke he'd suffered a few years earlier. But the signs are in the changed personality he notices, as if he had seen his own grave and won a reprieve. In fact, he wrote in his autobiography that in December 1911, illness had brought him close to death. What he doesn't say is what trials he had to undergo, mentally and physically, in order to go on painting. Those are recorded in his work. That change from being a gentle impressionist to an artist who looked at life's passions and who saw in the very act of painting the most passionate of themes. No one visiting the Neue Pinakothek in Munich can avoid being struck and perhaps puzzled by a group of paintings, each more than 12 feet across, that hang right in the entrance hall. Puzzled because it's not at first clear what they're supposed to be about, nor why they've been given so prominent a place. They're all landscapes of a rather barren nature, and you have to peer very closely to pick up any clues to their significance. In fact, they have a great deal of significance, as we'll see, not least in the history of Bavaria. The artist was Karl Rottman, and these pictures form part of a huge cycle on the theme of Greece. Rottman was commissioned to paint them between 1839 and 1850 by the Bavarian king Ludwig I. 38 pictures were originally planned for the royal collection. Rottman managed to complete 23, and this small group was later hung separately in the newly built Neue Pinakothek. The Greek cycle made Rottman famous. Here he is, painted by his fellow Munich artist August Riedel, wild-looking in the romantic fashion. Rottman began his Greek cycle with a view of Corinth and nearby Sicyon, twin cities of ancient Greece, with the Bay of Corinth beyond. From the very beginning, it's the landscape of the classical world that he emphasizes, rather than ruins. The reason is partly, no doubt, romanticism, desire to show the very land where the Greek heroes lived and breathed. But there was a more immediate reason. Greece was free at last from Turkish rule. Lord Byron had died in that cause only a few years earlier. What's more, Greece now had a young king from Bavaria. He was Prince Otto, son of King Ludwig. So Ludwig was anxious to show his own people this great land of gods and heroes which Lord Byron had died for, and which his own son now ruled. The king duly gave Rottman a list of those places that were familiar to all good Bavarians with a classical education from the pages of Homer and Herodotus, and sent him off to paint them, regardless, it seems, of whether anything remained to be seen of these heroic places, Corinth, Sparta, Thebes, Marathon. Not surprisingly, in the days before the spades of archaeologists, what Rottman mostly found when he got there was a parched and empty landscape. The contrast between legendary splendor and modern reality, Rottman very cleverly took advantage of. His romantic imagination savored the triumph of wild nature over man's former glories. And so, unlike most 19th century artist travelers who combed the ancient world for tombs and temples, Rottman created his Greek cycle out of pure landscape. Summer and winter, armed with his patron's list of historically significant themes, Rottman trudged round Greece and made the most admirable use of the somewhat impractical permission he'd been given. There might not be temples, but there were grand vistas. He began the cycle with Lake Kopais in 1839. The huge lake was actually drained not long after he painted it. But then, as in ancient times, it dominated the landscape round Thebes. And dominating the lake, the reason why King Ludwig wanted this picture, the huge silhouette of Mount Parnassus, legendary home of the god Apollo. And invisible on the far side of the mountain, as the king would have known, lies Delphi, seat of the Delphic oracle. But again, Rottman's theme is the vastness and desolation of modern Greece under the pitiless sun. Scarcely anything grows, anything moves. The only signs of life are a faint column of smoke rising from some tiny hut on an island in the lake. And a group of white pelicans preening their feathers on a rock. There's not a human being in sight. Rottman's list of classical subjects given to him by King Ludwig naturally included the city which had superseded Athens as the leading political power in ancient Greece. No Greek cycle could be considered complete without a painting of the city of Sparta. But whatever the king expected, what he got was a mound. Sparta had later been crushed by Thebes. Since then, it had virtually ceased to exist. A mile or so from here, Ludwig's son, now King Otto of Greece, was busy creating a new city, modern Sparta. But round the ancient city, what lay before Rottman's eyes was another empty landscape. A few trees, a snowy backcloth of the Pegetos Mountains, and the bare escarpments on which a proud city once stood. Look closely, and you can just pick out a farmer ploughing his fields. In the foreground, a romantic touch. Two figures have appeared from nowhere to wander among ancient stones. One gazes around him, the other is staring at the Greek text on a stone tablet. Just this one slender thread links the modern and the ancient world, nothing more. The romantic vision here is a gentle one. The wild eyes of Rottman saw nothing wild about the classical world except its inhospitable mountains. He saw the smallness of human life today compared to the heroic achievements of the past. The most gentle of these Greek landscapes is the view of Thebes, which he painted in 1842. Clouds, trees, greenery. It has almost a northern look. But where's the noble city of Thebes? It's the same story. Just a straggling village on a bare hillside, a wilderness all around it. A flock of sheep grazing, smoke rising from a cave in the rocks. Hardly the city of King Oedipus in Antigone. Not a place of heroes anymore, only peasants on their way to the fields. Rottman the Romantic would have read in Jean-Jacques Rousseau and warmed to the notion of simple people at one with nature. Women dancing in the woodland glade. Figures lounging in the sun with the soft tints of autumn around them. What Rottman gave to his royal patron was a sweet and kindly vision of Greece. Not a land of gods and heroes, but a cradle of freedom, Arcadia. A pastoral life at peace with nature. A romantic ideal in a low key. Rottman's contemporaries found his view of Marathon the most beautiful of the Greek cycle. It was here, on the shores of this distant bay, that in 490 BC the Athenians routed the Persian army when it was only a day's march from Athens. Here at least, King Ludwig could not have expected ruins, just the site of one of the most famous battles in ancient history. What Rottman did was to convey the mood of this desolate place where, according to legend, the neighing of horses and the clash of battle could still be heard at night. He did this by dramatic light and shadow, silvery water in sunlight, and mountains swept by thunderclouds, as though the storm itself is the battle, and the sparkle on the water is the Athenian victory over the invading Persian fleet. After spending the last 10 years of his life on the Greek cycle, Karl Rottman died in July 1850. His patron, King Ludwig, paid a handsome tribute to his memory, listing those qualities in which he excelled, above all the depiction of light, rocks, and water. Karl Rottman shines marvelously, he wrote. This might, at first glance, be one of those paintings in which quite forgotten aristocrats gaze at their estates from a superior vantage point, a lord's view of his land, with his lackeys gathered around him. It's a morning in early spring, a sharp, clear sky, horses and riders contemplating a scene of tranquility worthy of Claude Lorraine. In fact, the riders are in uniform, and it's a painting of a battle. The Siege of Kobell, the year 1807. The young German artist who painted it was Wilhelm von Kobell. At the age of 26, he was summoned from Mannheim to Munich and appointed official painter at the court of Bavaria. His fame was based on paintings of animals, and in particular horses, and his inspiration for these came from the country where sporting pictures were extremely fashionable, England. Artists such as John F. Herring and George Stubbs. When Kobell painted hunting or battle scenes, it was usually the horse that had pride of place. The movement of horses, their poise, their colour, and breed. He observed these things with the greatest accuracy. Kobell's painting of the Siege of Kobell records an event in the Napoleonic Wars that had taken place only a year earlier. Kobell is held by the Prussian army. The Bavarians, on the side of Napoleon, are besieging the town, and our rather distant viewpoint is shared by the Bavarian High Command. The man who commissioned the picture, along with many other battle pictures, was Crown Prince Ludwig of Bavaria. The prince was anxious to record for posterity the glorious achievements of his army, and Kobell had exactly the right skills for the job. A landscape and horse painter who was also meticulous about matters of uniform and military detail. It was a painstaking job for Kobell. Painting events of his own day, he couldn't afford to make mistakes, and he certainly couldn't make it up. Crown Prince Ludwig was a stickler for accuracy, and Kobell had already demonstrated how accurate he could be in two earlier paintings, Attack on Spielberg and Michelsburg, and Firing at Ulm. Even though the figures are tiny amid the panorama of battle, all the officers are portrayed individually and can be identified by name. And here, directing operations in the center on his white charger, is Napoleon. Kobell's portrait of the young Crown Prince is painted in exactly the spirit of painstaking realism. We're not shown much about the personality of the prince, but we're shown very precisely that he's colonel of the 3rd Regiment of Light Horse. As a patron of battle paintings, Ludwig rejected the idea of small cabinet pictures, such as the king his father had commissioned. Large pictures were recommended to him by his artistic advisor, the Munich landscape painter Georg von Dillis. Art was supposed to inspire noble deeds and therefore should be very large. Only grandeur would make the desired impact. In other words, 10 feet across. Crown Prince Ludwig also arranged for high-ranking officers who had taken part in the campaigns to provide Kobell with eyewitness accounts. And he sent Kobell to the various battle sites so that he could get the location absolutely right. The artist made landscape studies on the spot, and he built up a portfolio of action studies, uniforms, military formations, and the like. So this apparently relaxed and casual grouping of people in a landscape is in fact a meticulous account of what took place one spring morning during the Napoleonic Wars around the German town of Kobell. The Bavarians had been holding the Prussian army under siege. But now, in the early morning, the Prussians are making a final effort to break out of the fortified town. And intense fighting is taking place down there in the valley. In the far distance, the roofs and spires of Kobell rise in the misty half-light soon after dawn. The town looks still asleep, but out of the huddle of buildings and narrow streets, the Prussian army has moved towards us, into the open valley below. Like so many ghosts, the two armies engage in the very center of the painting. In the background, far away to the left, the River Oder. And on the right bank of the river, the Bavarian artillery has taken up its position. Fighting has broken out, and puffs of smoke are rising. It's from the drift of gun smoke that we can see the whole town is still surrounded, and we sense that the whole situation for the Prussians is hopeless. From their safe distance, the Bavarian senior officers are gazing down on a scene of imminent victory. In contrast to the very vague account of the battle, Kobell has described the splendid officers with painstaking detail, heroes in their plumes and finery. On the back of the painting, there's an inscription in Kobell's hand. This painting shows the fortress of Kobell in Prussian Silesia, which was besieged by the Royal Bavarian troops, and it represents the third attempt to break out by the Prussians within. Below are portrait sketches. In the center, Major General von Radlovich. His junior officers are likewise sketched and named. Sub-Lieutenant Schwarz, Sub-Lieutenant von Heidecker. And then, on the other side of the general, Lieutenant Besenecker and Captain of Horse von Karg. Each one takes his place in the picture exactly as Kobell has drawn him from life. The Siege of Kobell, then, is only incidentally a battle painting. It's partly a military pageant, an account more of uniforms than of people, and certainly not people who are engaged in fighting or show any preparedness to do so. There are no dead bodies, no agonies of dying. All that takes place only in our imaginations, down there in that peaceful-looking valley beyond the beautifully tailored officers. The landscape all but absorbs the battle, so that these men might also be admiring the view on this clear spring morning.